Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. On this episode, we are going to talk about 2026. And we want 2026 to be a year of momentum. We want it to be a year of success. We want it to be a year of progress. But if that is going to happen, then we've got to do some thinking about how to get unstuck. There are areas in all of our lives and all of our businesses where we are just stuck. There's a goal that's not getting achieved, a deal that's not getting done, a problem that doesn't get resolved, or an idea that just hasn't taken off. It's stuck. And what I want to do today is I want to begin to diagnose why it is that things get stuck, how it is that we can understand those dynamics more greatly for the purpose of then putting together some solutions and understanding some direction about how it is that we can get unstuck. If we learn how to do this, then all of a sudden, we can be bold in 2026. We can pursue big things. We can pursue great ideas. We can go get those huge transformative deals, knowing that if we get stuck somewhere in the process, we have a way, we have a strategy for overcoming that so that that can be our reality this year. Let's jump into this conversation about how it is that we can get unstuck this year. As I reflected back on 2025, I realized that many of the leaders and professionals that I coached, the reason that they engaged me is because they were stuck. They were stuck in something. There was a deal that couldn't come together. There was a problem that couldn't get resolved. Maybe they had a goal that they had a hard time finding traction against. Some of them had ideas, but just didn't know how to take the idea and make it something that was valuable and something that would work. And so they just reached out and said, "Can you help me get unstuck?" And so I began thinking about this idea of getting stuck in business, getting stuck in terms of what we want to be doing in life, or getting stuck in terms of becoming the kind of people or leaders that we want to be. And I wanted to take a few minutes here and just think about this idea of being stuck. Maybe you're like me and you've got areas of your life that are just stuck. They're just not going like you'd hope they'd go, or you're not seeing as much success with this particular strategy. And so you find yourself stuck and you need to make a change. You need to do something different. Well, what I want to do is I want to peel back the layers and to begin to understand how it is that we get stuck, because that will then teach us how we get unstuck. And as we head into 2026, I hope we can do so with tremendous momentum. But to do that, that means that there may be some things that we need to get unstuck. So let's talk about the 4 different areas where I see people getting stuck. Number 1 is they get stuck in their pursuit of a goal. And for whatever reason, they just can't achieve that goal in the time frame that they hoped that they would. Or they find themselves at a place to where that goal just seems really, really distant. Maybe it was too ambitious, I don't know, but what I find is that people often get stuck. I've got a goal like this, a goal that I just, in 2025, just never achieved. And one of the goals that I set for myself was trying to break goals down into daily habits. One of the daily habits that I wanted to get into was to read a chapter of a book every day before I went to bed. Now, I was trying to replace all the scrolling and all the time on social media, maybe watching a little TV. That end of the day time is wasted time for me. And so I was trying to make it more productive. And I said, okay, I'm going to read a chapter of a book before I go to sleep. That's going to be a much better use of that time when you're kind of winding down for the day. It just never happened. And so the idea that that hour was going to be the hour that I invest in reading, what I realized was I just got stuck. And I literally got stuck every day to where I got to that point in the day, I was tired, I wanted to go to bed, or I was distracted with something, And it was just way too easy to put the book aside and to not do the reading that day. And so here I look up months later, and I haven't made any progress against that goal. I have not formed that daily habit. All the books that I set aside to read didn't get read, and it was just an utter failure. Not surprising, right? I mean, if you set a goal for your last activity of the day, chances are that the day is going to end and you're going to get tired, and that's just not going to get done. And so what I had to do is I had to really step back and say, what is the goal? Is the goal really about just replacing the social media stuff, or am I really trying to find time to read more? And as I looked at it, it was really about taking in more content. It was really about reading. And so instead of just being stuck and committed to this one way to get it done, I had to kind of pivot. I had to rethink how to do that. And so I began to find other areas where I would have capacity and time to read. Listening to books on tape as I hiked or as I was on a run provided hours of reading that was really, really helpful in terms of moving through some content. I was a bit more disciplined in terms of my airplane rides and finding time to read there. And I didn't put any pressure on myself. I just said, instead of just turning to my phone to spend time kind of scrolling, use that as a trigger to say, what could I read right now? And just doing that, keeping it a little bit more informal, I got unstuck. And over the last couple of months, I've been able to consume a lot more from a reading standpoint because I thought about it a little bit differently. The other ways that people get stuck is in deals. There are just deals that get stuck. There are barriers to an agreement. And as a result of that, we just can't find our way through it. I remember a story of a city that was trying to acquire a lady's house. The city was wanting to build this huge civic arts plaza. This was going to be an exciting new moment. The city was assembling property. And here was the moment where they had one parcel to acquire before they could move forward with the project. And it was owned and occupied by a lady who was not interested in selling. And so the city sent this real estate professional broker out to try to do a deal with her. And that broker offered her a lot of money and she just wasn't interested. And so the city fired that real estate broker after trying to give her more money, which didn't work. And they hired another real estate broker. Unfortunately, when that real estate broker went out, the lady's dog got loose. And when the dog got loose, it ran out into the street and got hit by a car. Now the city's in real trouble because here, this transaction, this real estate acquisition, now this has become personal for this lady. This was a deal that was stuck and no one had any idea how to get it unstuck. Except there came along another real estate professional who told the city, I might be able to get you this house, but you've got to be willing to do it my way. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to revoke all of her offers. She doesn't want to sell her house. And the reason that she doesn't want to sell her house is because she doesn't know where she's going to live next. And so if you solve her problem, then you're going to be in a better position for her to solve yours. You will be unstuck. And so this realtor went out and instead of trying to acquire her house, he just went out to get to know her, began asking some questions about her living situation. And before he ever started talking about her house, he was showing her other houses to see if there was a way to find her a more suitable place for her to live as she got older. He was successful. He found her another place that she was interested in. And she saw that as a great place to kind of spend her later years. And so she made an offer on it. And then he just patiently waited until the moment where finally she came back and said, well, I probably need to do something with my current house. What do you think? And he said, well, I think the city's been interested in buying it from you. We've probably got a buyer ready to go if you're willing to have a conversation with the city again. And sure enough, she was. And so that was a deal that got unstuck because, again, someone came in and thought differently about how to approach the problem. Or there are ideas that don't move forward. They just get stuck. The example I love to share here is the example of the iPhone. Apple sat on this idea for almost a decade. And the reason that they sat on it is not because they didn't have the technology worked out. They did. The reason that they sat on it is because they were fearful of cannibalizing their other products that were so popular and doing so well. For example, the iPod, if you remember the days of the iPod, or iTunes, if you remember the days of iTunes. These were hugely popular products and services and platforms that Apple had, and they were absolutely fearful that if they introduced a new product, it would kill these products. And so for decades, they sat on the technology, not wanting to move it forward quickly because they didn't want to hurt these other products and their business as a whole. Finally, Steve Jobs began to think differently about it. And what he became fearful of, his risk equation that changed, was he began to fear, well, what if someone else does this? What if someone else comes to the table with a phone that could also serve as the iPod, also serve as someone's calendar, could also be their camera, all these different things that the iPhone does? He began to realize that that moment was getting closer, where if they didn't do this, someone else would. And so the fear pivoted from cannibalizing their own products to being at a place to where someone else introduced the technology that they were sitting on. And as soon as that risk calculation changed, here came the iPhone. And the iPhone put Apple on a completely different growth trajectory than what it was doing, just relying upon the iPod and iTunes to carry it forward. And so as we think about ideas can get stuck. And what you'll notice in terms of thinking through these is that every single one of these required a different way of thinking. Now, here is the last category where I think things get stuck. And the reason I save this one for last is because this one reveals what happens if we are not intentional about taking things that are stuck and getting them unstuck. That's the importance of this episode. That's the importance of this investment of time, is to develop the confidence and the skills and the know-how in terms of taking something that is stuck and then making it unstuck. So, problems, they get stuck too, to where there is no solution. The problem becomes the status quo. There's no answer to it. There's no way out of it. We're just stuck living with the problem. And as a result of that, what often happens is the problem gets worse and worse and worse. The example here that really intrigues me, and my son Deacon will be fired up about this because he loves airplanes and he loves the airline industry, is back about 15 years or so ago, we were looking at a very severe pilot shortage. This would have been about 2010 to 2020 or so. There was a projection that we were going to be 10,000 pilots short here in the United States of America. And so the growth of all these airlines, the low-cost carriers that were becoming more and more abundant, the desire for more and more people to fly every single day, that just created a massive demand for pilots. And yet, the airlines, they didn't really want to invest in harvesting and producing more pilots. And so they weren't willing to kind of create the incentives for more pilots. The current pilots weren't ready to retire yet. This was kind of before the boomers got to the age of retirement. And so they were wanting to hold on and fly a little longer. Flight schools were really expensive. And so there wasn't an easy way for someone to become a pilot because of the expense associated with all the hours needed to become a commercial pilot. And so here we were just living in this situation to where pilots were becoming in demand. And as a result of that, they were demanding more from a salary standpoint. Their unions were leveraging this moment, and this began to strain the airline industry. And because no one figured out to kind of get this problem unstuck from its stuck position, all of a sudden it became unstuck real fast. And what happened in 2020 and right around that time period, as you recall, is COVID hit. Now, once COVID hit, what happened is it lowered the demand. But in doing that, it gave then the airlines some incentive. So, for example, the airlines did a whole lot in terms of early retirement packages. And so a lot of pilots retired during that time period. And then everything, it swung back really, really quickly. And now all of a sudden you had people that were wanting to fly again. You had pent up demand where people hadn't taken vacations in a year or two. And now there was a ton of demand for air travel as we were coming out of COVID, and there weren't the pilots. And so at this moment, the airlines started doing what they needed to do to get pilots. They started providing incentives. They started helping with tuition. They started doing all of the things in order to create more and more pilots. And because of that, they have been able to experience substantial growth since that time. So the challenge with a problem being stuck is that if it doesn't get unstuck, it can become a crisis, and it can become far more costly to deal with if we don't get it unstuck early. So let's spend some time thinking about what do we do? What do we do when we find ourselves stuck? This whole conversation reminds me of that movie, The Truman Show. I don't know if you remember that movie from back in the late 90s, but here you had this show featuring this character, Truman Burbank. It was played by Jim Carrey. And this character that he was stuck, but he didn't know it. This is a movie that raises all sorts of kind of ethical quandaries within us. But it was this movie where it depicted this young man who was adopted by a TV studio, a production studio. And he was raised in a world that really wasn't real. It was all on television. And as he grew older, he began to realize that his world was a bit off, that there were things that were happening that just didn't quite make sense. And there's finally this kind of magical moment where he realizes he's stuck when he gets to the edge of his world and he touches the glass that is encapsulating him and his entire life. And as we think about that moment, sometimes that's how we are, is we're stuck and we don't even know it. We just think that that's reality. And so we just live in it. But the reality is that there could be something better. There could be a solution waiting for us, but it requires us to recognize that we are stuck. So every single person that called me in the last year and said, I think I'm stuck, I need some help, do you have any advice and counsel? The first thing I would do is I would commend them and say, you've taken a massive step in understanding that you're stuck, and your willingness to reach out and have somebody, me or anybody else, help you think differently about this problem or this idea that won't go anywhere. That is the first huge step forward in becoming unstuck. So the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to realize that we're stuck, and we've got to put our egos aside, and we have to be willing to recognize that we are in this state of stuck. And it will require us to think differently. It will require us to humble ourselves in terms of the idea that we had, it's not working, or the solution that we had, it's not going to work. And so now that requires us to go on a search and a path for a different solution or a different idea that might win the day. This is like being in a maze where we know there's a way through. It's just the first 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or however many attempts may not work. We're going to find ourselves stuck. And so we've got to go back and we've got to find a different direction. So the first thing is to recognize that we're stuck. That's actually very difficult for a lot of people. And the challenge is I see so many people that are stuck and they don't realize it, or their egos won't let them acknowledge it. And that is just a recipe for staying stuck. Number 2, we've got to prioritize what is stuck. So over the Christmas holiday, my son and his girlfriend, they brought home a 1,000-piece puzzle. This was a Thomas Kincaid picture. This was one of the hardest puzzles I have ever done because there was so much floral and greenery. It was really hard to kind of put this whole puzzle together because so much of the puzzle looked exactly the same. There weren't those kind of icons you could pick out. And so they thought they were going to do this 1,000-piece puzzle in like 2 or 3 hours. And I made a really large bet with them that they couldn't get that done. And about 30 minutes into this puzzle experience, they realized that they were absolutely stuck. This was not going to be as easy. We finally got the puzzle done. It took about a week of constant work and going back to it. And as we started off, though, in this moment where we laid out all the pieces and realized that we were stuck before we even got started, we had to prioritize what was stuck. And we had to prioritize how we were going to get unstuck. And so for those of you that do puzzles know, the place to start is the edges. And so we went to work trying to get the edges all outlined. That took us 3 hours in itself, just get the edges sorted out. But there is the starting point, is we've got to prioritize what is stuck. Many times what we do is we'll take something that's stuck, like this puzzle, and be like, that's too hard. I'm not going to deal with that tonight. We don't have time. And so we put it back in the box, only to never bring it out again. But here we're like, no, we're doing this. We're in. Like, we're going to prioritize this. Clear the table. We are making this happen. We didn't do it that night, but we prioritized it by putting it out and putting it on the table. And as a result of that, we kept coming back to it again and again and again until we finally were unstuck and got the puzzle completed. And so the second thing that we have to do is we got to prioritize what is stuck. Instead of putting it on the back burner, which is so tempting and so easy to do, we actually have to move it to the front burner to where we can focus on it, we can grind on it, we can think about it, we can bring others around it. And in doing that, we then put whatever is stuck in a position to get unstuck. Okay, now let's diagnose how things get stuck. If we're talking about deals, or we're talking about problem solving, or we're talking about ideas, many times what happens when you're stuck is that you get stuck in a certain position or perspective. Now, the problem is that our positions and our perspectives, this is how we think something should be resolved, or how something should be defined, or this is what we're willing to offer, or the demand that we're making in terms of what we need. These are our positions or perspectives. These are things that are usually pretty concrete. They're pretty tangible. But what happens is that these create dead ends. Because if the other side isn't willing to accommodate those, or if we're not willing to be flexible with that position or that perspective, oftentimes we find ourselves like in that maze where we run into a dead end. Now, unsophisticated people just stop right there. They're just stuck. Sophisticated people, though, back up and say, let's go try another way. And so one of the things that we have to do is we've got to try to figure out, how do we get away from our positions? How do we release our perspectives? How do we open our minds to another way? And I think one of the best ways to do this is to really ask the question, whether we're stuck in a goal, a deal, a problem, an idea, whatever it is to ask the question, what are we really trying to achieve here? What are we really trying to do? And so for the puzzle, to use that as an example, Well, we weren't really trying to get it done in 2 or 3 hours. We really wanted to accomplish something together as a family. And so even though it took probably 12 or 15 hours to get this crazy puzzle done, we had a better understanding of what we wanted to do. And so it gave us all sorts of permission to take more time. If we think about the iPhone and that idea that got stuck, once they realized, like, we want to be first to market with this. We want to be the leader in terms of bringing this technology to people. Once they realized that that was more important than what was causing them to be stuck, it became pretty easy in terms of kind of moving forward. And so in anything you're stuck on, one of the starting points, once you recognize it, once you prioritize it, is to ask this question, okay, what am I really trying to achieve here? To just step back for a little bit and to begin thinking about it more broadly. And as you do that, and you begin thinking about what you really want or what you're really trying to achieve, it's important to get clarity on that. That clarity will become your guide in terms of how to get unstuck, because it's that clarity that you will measure every idea, every solution, every new approach against to determine whether or not it accomplishes that thing that you are trying to achieve. Okay, so let's get more specific about this. So as you start thinking in a different way, let me provide you with just some guidance in terms of how to do that. The first thing is to really think about your interests. Okay, these are the things that are driving you. They're different from your positions. It's the why. So you take a position or you make a demand. There's a reason why you're making that demand or you're taking that position. And that's the thing that becomes more interesting, is what does that do for you? If you were able to get that, what would that mean for you? And what happens is many times those things, they actually help us deal with our fears, or they actually feed our ego, or they actually help us work through a circumstance that we're in. These are where we're really searching for, what do we actually need? And then once we have clarity on our interest, then we want to look to the interest of the other side. What are they trying to accomplish? What's driving them? What fears, egos, those kinds of things? What is it we're dealing with in terms of the other stakeholders around this goal or deal or problem or idea? The people maybe that are being the barriers that are keeping us from it being successful, the folks that are our obstacles. Understanding why they are being an obstacle, understanding what they need in order to allow this new idea or this solution to move forward, that's what we've got to do in order to understand the different direction that we might go when we find ourselves stuck. And then we can really look hard at the problem and say, okay, with all of that as kind of the background, what is it exactly that is keeping this idea from working, or keeping this problem from getting solved, or keeping this deal from happening? When we get an understanding of the problem, but do so in the context of the interest around it, now all of a sudden, we've got options, we've got flexibility. And so one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to seek understanding. We've got to make sure that we understand the nature of why we're stuck before we know exactly what to do when we're stuck. Next thing to do when you find yourself stuck is to look for the misalignment. So now we've identified the interest on both sides. We've got a better understanding of what the specific problem is that is keeping us stuck. And here's where we just have to look for misalignment. So if we think about values, we think about goals, we think about objectives, we think about these interests that we've talked about. All we've got to do is identify where is it that those are misaligned in terms of the people that have to come together to kind of make this happen. And so it might be internally in terms of us, to where are we misaligned a bit in terms of our priorities? And maybe that's the reason why we're not getting the goal accomplished. But if we're dealing with other people, whether it be a deal or a problem or an idea, then thinking about, okay, where's the misalignment here to where we're not able to form this partnership or we're not able to find an agreement in order to get something done. And that misalignment, again, is going to provide you with really important information in terms of where to go and how then to create a solution that moves you forward. Almost every time we get stuck, it is a result of some sort of misalignment. And it's at that level that we need to be thinking so that we can find ourselves unstuck, but unstuck in such a way that we will stay unstuck, as opposed to just moving into the next problem that is going to be a hurdle for us. Now, the last thing, and this is really, really important, is what often happens is that when people find themselves stuck, they lean in even further. And if their demand or their approach or the solution that they offer, if that is threatening for whatever reason to somebody else who's going to stand in the way and be a barrier, or if it doesn't align with their interest, by us just leaning into that more, all we do is to cause their resistance to elevate as well. And so we just find ourselves more and more stuck. And yet that seems the very intuitive, natural thing to do is let's go back and let's make the case again, or let's go find new information and make a stronger case. Or in the case of the realtor in the house, let's go get more money and go offer it to the lady. And yet by doing that, all we do is we find ourselves in a state of stuck. And so what we've got to remember is that we need to stop trying to convince. And instead, what we need to try to do is connect. Connect with the things that are driving the other side to become the barrier, or connect with the things that is keeping whoever it is from becoming engaged, which is keeping your deal from happening or your problem from being solved. And so I like to say it this way. Don't push harder on the demand or your idea or solution, but instead pull harder on the understanding and the other people and help them get there. So don't push, instead pull. Pull on the understanding and pull on the other people in terms of helping them get to where you want them to get. By doing that, what we will do is we will find ourselves in a place where we are no longer stuck and we will start to see momentum build. And so if we look back on all of this, all these different ideas, all the ways that people get stuck, the ways that you can overcome it, the key thing to manage as you're kind of looking at all of this is risk. Risk is what is going to cause people to make things stuck. I run into it in mediation all the time, where we're making multi-million-dollar decisions, whether to settle the case or not. And at the end of the day, the number one driver for that decision, it comes down to risk. And the more that you can find ways to minimize people's risk, the more open they're going to become in terms of finding agreement with you, working with you, pursuing your idea, or helping you achieve your goal. And so, as we think about doing business in 2026, yes, we want to think about our own risks, but we also want to think about risks strategically and recognize that if we don't manage everyone's risk appropriately, we're probably going to find ourselves stuck. And once we do, we've got to work through this process, and it's very difficult to get unstuck. And so in order to keep ourselves from getting stuck, this is the moment where we've got to help people manage risk. We've got to help them understand the positive in terms of our idea or the deal that we're proposing to them. And we've got to mitigate those things that would cause them to say no. So by doing that, what does that mean? Well, that means that some of your conflicts right now, some of your troubled relationships, those might get dealt with in 2026. Those might get better. And boy, would that be a relief. It also means that some of those deals that are out there, those deals will get done if we know how to do this really well. If they get stuck, it is not the end of the day. It's actually only the beginning to where you can go to work on this process and begin thinking about how to make those deals a reality and make them happen and enjoy the fruits that come with those deals. What it means is these ideas that you have, that you're passionate about, that you want to see come to fruition, these ideas have more legs. They've got more life because you've got a process for helping those ideas overcome those barriers and overcome those things that may cause them to get stuck. And if you do all that, I think you're going to be in a position to where you're going to achieve more of your goals. You're going to enjoy more success that comes your way. There are a lot of people that can do business when it's easy, but there's only a few people, there's only a few leaders that really know how to take something that is stuck and to turn it into something that becomes wildly successful. That's the mark of a great leader. And that's the opportunity we have by putting to work some of these ideas that I've outlined for you today. Thanks for being part of this conversation about being stuck and how we get unstuck. Remember, the first thing is we've got to have the humility to recognize that we're stuck. We got to prioritize what is stuck. Then we've got to think about how do we move away from these positions? How do we begin to test our position and our perspective? To do that, we've got to think about our interest. We got to think about the interest of the others involved. And then ultimately, we've got to redefine the problem that is keeping us from moving forward. As we do so, we want to look for misalignment because there is our opportunity to get unstuck. And then we've got to be disciplined, not just to lean into our position or our perspective, to stop trying to convince the other side that we're right, and instead think about how we can connect with them more deeply. Instead of pushing harder, remember, we want to pull harder in terms of the understanding and in terms of the other people involved to get them where we want them to get. I hope that your 2026 is a year where you are not stuck, where you have great momentum, where you have great success. But if you get stuck, hopefully this episode will be beneficial to you in giving you a path forward so you can get back on that path to success. Thanks for listening to the Negotiation Made Simple podcast. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.